Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Paul Skeldon, one of the analysts at RetailX, and we're here to talk today about the EMEA Fashion Report that we are launching right now, right in front of you. The report, I'm going to go through some of the key findings from it. It's obviously quite a big, in-depth report we've done that dissects the entire European fashion industry from an e-commerce perspective, how it's performed in 2022 and where it's likely to head in 23 and beyond. I'm not going to go into everything that's in it because I want you to download it and read it. But hopefully we'll be able to give you some of the sort of key findings, a flavour of where the sector is at currently. I'm joined today by Andrew Mossbarger, Drew to his friends, who is going to join me for a bit of a discussion about some of these key findings once I've had a little canter through my slides. So, Drew, thank you very much for joining us. If you just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Paul. It's good to be here. I'm, like you said, Drew Mossbarger. I've been working in the retail and e-commerce space for the last 20 years of my career. 7 years I was at Nike leading search and recommendations. Was a couple years at Amazon leading discovery and reorder journeys, and a couple years at Wayfair as head of search and recommendations. Now I'm at ViSenze, which is the leader in using visual AI to power search, recommendations, and bring product performance insights for the fashion and home goods industry. And really, these are two very visually driven market segments. And as a platform, we use AI to enrich product understanding, which opens a lot of really cool doors. No one buys fashion or home goods based on descriptions or attributes alone. They really have to love how products look. And yet most systems only allow for discovery based on key attributes or keywords. And so this is where the AI and the visual aspects really come to play, because we allow customers to follow visual interests and find products that match the styles and looks that they like. And we also provide powerful insights to the retailers on product performance based on these visual attributes, which is really important and brings insights into demand forecasting and better understanding future planning. So we offer a whole platform we call Discovery Suite that enables visual search and many different recommendation strategies, A/B testing, and catalog performance dashboards.
Well, thanks for that, Drew. I look forward to having a chat with you shortly around some of the things your company does and how it can help fashion retailers in EMEA. But before we come to that, I'm going to do a quick skip through some of the high points of our EMEA Fashion Report, which launched just last week. There's a QR code at the end, so do feel free to scan that and download the report and read it. There's far more in it than I can get to today, so this is really just some of the key findings, some of the top line things that we drew out of our research across the EMEA fashion market. It looks at how it behaved and performed in 2022 and some of early 2023. It's a wide-ranging report. That's a snapshot of some of the things that are in it. It goes into a huge amount of detail about what's happened in the market, a whole range of case studies of how some of the leading retailers have performed, and of course then some future gazing stuff about where it's all going. But just to give you a flavour of what's in it, the top line finding really is that e-commerce revenues in fashion in Europe have started to decline. And in fact, in 2022, Europe fell just below the US. As you can see from the top graph there, it's always tracked just above it. It's now sort of dipping a little bit below. The US has seen particularly fast growth. Asia has dropped off as well as Europe, but the fall has been much bigger in the European online fashion market since sort of its peak in 2020. I mean, let's give that some perspective. It was obviously very, very high in 2020 because of the sort of lockdowns of the pandemic. Growth even was quite high in 2021. Growth is still there. It's just slowing, and it's slowed at a reasonably dramatic rate. The reason is war. What is it good for? Absolutely not fashion. As you can see there, if we break down the sort of regions of Europe and how they performed, they're all, bumping along. They've all seen this decline from the absolute peak in 2020, but in Eastern Europe in particular, it's fallen off a cliff, and that's obviously to do with the proximity to Ukraine, a quite dramatic fall off in terms of sales from European fashion brands into Russia. There's also been some impact on sailing into Ukraine. It's also impacted some of the sort of surrounding satellite countries as well. So that's really dragged it down. There is some growth there in other parts of the market, as you can see. Central and Western Europe bumbling along at about 7% growth, which isn't too bad. Northern Europe's actually ticking up a bit there, which is encouraging. Southern Europe is still growing reasonably well, though obviously down on 2021. But the main impact has been on the war, because of the war. The big impact of that obviously is on GDP, which impacts then people's discretionary spending and their consumer confidence. The UK, surprisingly, was one of the least negative. I suspect that may have changed in the intervening months since the research was done towards the middle of 2022. Slovakia way out in front there, but most of them ticking at around a 2% decrease in GDP. The UK on 1%. I think this, as I say, may have shifted, but I think the model is still the same. It's shifted to the left there with even more negative growth. So this GDP sort of downgrading, as I say, impacts people's discretionary spending and their confidence in the economy, which does slow down their spending on all sorts of stuff. Fashion being one of them, particularly the nature of online fashion, where a lot of it is quite instant and disposable. People do it on a whim. A lot of that sort of is starting to not dry up, but show signs of weakness because of lack of confidence. Inflation too is having an impact, again off the back of rising energy prices, and which affects transport and raw materials and all manner of things that feed into the manufacture of pretty much all goods. This is a pattern we've seen across all of retail, particularly in Europe. As you can see there, sort of clothing and footwear inflation model, sort of all the way from 1997. It's never been so bad as it's been between 2020 and 2022. Clearly, it was worse there in 2020. But currently, it's not doing too well either. In September 2022, it was showing signs when the research was done that it was possibly had peaked. I think again, this is sort of the case, but certainly with the inflation figures here in the UK, it's sort of almost flat. It's high and decreasing very slowly. Possibly could still go up. There's obviously, for those of you watching the news, an ongoing sort of battle between rising interest rates to try and tackle inflation, but it doesn't seem to be yielding any results currently. This downgrade has been seen across all fashion segments pretty much equally. Footwear there slightly worse than the others. I don't think there's any real discernible reason for that. It's just the way it is. I think perhaps people buy shoes less frequently than perhaps other clothes because they last longer and can, to some degree, compared to some fast fashion items, they're much more expensive as a one-off purchase. So I suspect that's why that's being pulled down that way. But overall, the pattern is the same across all segments of the industry. So that's the bad news. Looking more at how consumers actually shop. As we can see there now, there's a slight error in the chart. The dark blue there is offline. And as you can see, it's still very EMEA, Central and Western Europe, which are sort of slightly more developed in terms of e-commerce to some degree. It's a sort of 60-40 split. In parts of Eastern Europe, it's very much dominated by offline, and same in Southern Europe. Northern Europe, still surprisingly, I think, is a sort of 1/3, 2/3 split, which is interesting because they're quite a sort of technologically sophisticated and advanced demographic in the northern parts of Europe. However, I think this does belie what's actually going on, because this is where purchases are made. However, I think online, and particularly, as we'll see in a moment, mobile, are playing a much more significant role in how people do their fashion shopping. So I think this is more indicative, I think, of a less linear approach to shopping. People are finding stuff on mobile via social media, then they're looking online to sort of see if they can replicate the look or pick up on stuff that they've seen from influencers or or friends or other people out there, and then are going in store to buy it. I think you're also seeing some people going into store, not finding it in their size or trying to find it cheaper and buying it online. I think this is predominantly driven by mobile. And if you look at the mobile desktop split for how those online shoppers in those regions shop, it's reasonably uniform. It's kind of half and half. I mean, it's sort of, possibly 60-40 more there in Eastern, Northern and Southern Europe, compared to Central and Western, where it is effectively 50-50. Mobile plays a very significant role. And I think this, along with the online offline data, shows just sort of how hybrid and non-linear the whole shopping process has become. We've seen this in all our reports, actually, looking at not just Europe but sort of globally. It's very much that a lot of sales may be sort of actually taking place in physical retail locations now they're open, but online, and particularly mobile, plays a much more significant role in this much more complicated and less linear purchase path. This is particularly prevalent in fashion, not least because a lot of the people who buy fashion are quite young, and they are typically mobile first. So they're looking online, they're spending all week looking at stuff online on their mobile phones, and then at the weekend going and buying it is largely what's happening. I expect this sort of trend to continue. I suspect in a year or two we're going to see a much more 50-50 split between online and offline, and a much more 50-50 or even 60-40 split in mobile's favour in many of the regions. Germany shows the highest demand for buying online fashion, particularly if you look at it in terms of buying mostly online or buying a bit of both. Sweden is very much focused at the top there, and Poland, which is just beneath it, which isn't labelled on the graph, are both very much focused on buying online fashion sort of in one way or another. What I think is more interesting is where in sort of places like Spain, it's much more sort of balanced between the two. Where you're sort of seeing people doing both. And again, I think this exemplifies this idea that shoppers are increasingly becoming more hybrid. It's not a linear journey. And I think all retailers in fashion or outside need to have this in mind, that they need to approach how they market to their consumers based around more to do with the idea that they're shopping in a different way. They're online, they're on mobile, they're in store on mobile. They're in store on mobile, then they're going home and buying online. It's a very complicated thing. I think understanding that behaviour and leveraging it is something that's sort of key to marketing, particularly, and engagement. And I think this is one of the places where AI particularly can start to play a role in really understanding this much more complicated and granular way that people are behaving. So that's the sort of view from some of the European countries. Who's doing well out of this? Well, that's I think the 25 of the top 50 that we looked at in the report. ASOS way out in front there. That's traffic to its main domain from the EMEA region. You can see it's quite it's not quite far in front. It's a little bit in front of H&M. The two of those are very powerful fashion retailers and dominant across Europe. What I think is particularly interesting about this is that Vinted, they're at number 3, and Shein at number 5 very much buck this trend. Vinted, secondhand vintage, pre-loved, a lot of it sort of luxury, affordable luxury, quasi-luxury items. Third most popular. Who knew? I mean, this I think really shows that there's a big sort of buy-in to the idea of pre-loved fashion. On the other hand, Shein, I think, is the ultimate in disposable fashion. Its turnover of new lines and new looks is really rapid. It's a matter of weeks, and I think Vinted and Shein, in the context of being both in the top 10 here and both significant traffic drivers, shows that there is a big cohort of people who want to buy much more bespoke, one-off luxury items that are high value, that will last long and stand out against the sort of run of high street fashion. And then there's this other cohort, similar size number of people, who are looking to buy ultra cheap, super fast fashion from the likes of Shein. And I think this dichotomy is has broadened over the years. It used, 5 years ago, it was very much dominated by fast fashion. I think the fact that Vinted has crept all the way up there to the third position shows that there is a real shift in terms of the kind of things people want to buy. And I think there's also a drive towards second hand, which is also playing into Vinted doing so well there. As we can see, nearly 50% of millennial and Gen Z shoppers are buying second hand. I mean, sort of 42% of each. It's not even that. It's a third of Gen X. It's quite a high proportion of shoppers there are buying second hand. I think the younger people typically are much more driven by green credentials, but I think there's also this move away from the ubiquity of fast fashion and everyone looking the same. There's a whole group of younger people who want to be different. I mean, that's sort of the purpose of fashion, isn't it? To stand out and look good, and that necessarily doesn't mean just all wearing the same stuff. And I think this is driving this thrust in second-hand selling, because they are buying second-hand luxury and second-hand sort of designer brands because they're cool. And the Love Island TV program here in the UK has been largely sponsored, and the contestants clothed by eBay and their heads of vintage and pre-loved clothing. So it's becoming a real sort of trend amongst younger people, and that's being seen in the market. And I think they're going back to our top 50 companies. This is why like of Vinted are so high up in it. I can see that probably only going up, particularly with the cost of living pressures we outlined at the beginning of the presentation, forcing people to think about sort of one, selling their clothes because they can make a little bit of money, and people wanting to buy them because they're bespoke, they're different, but also they might well be cheaper. So I think those two things are going to drive the second-hand market and its impact on European fashion skywards. In France, it's particularly popular. A lot of that, I think, is to do with many of the luxury brands and designer brands being French. The French are also, it sounds stereotypical, but it's a positive one. Are quite stylish. I think they seek out style. They seek out the more unusual. Equally, it's very popular and growing in popularity in the United States and in the UK and in Germany. So I think it is something that is spreading across the world, really. But in terms of Europe, which this report focuses on, it's very much looking at becoming a really significant part of the fashion market. And I think we're seeing all sorts of fashion retailers buying in clothes, buying back clothes, recycling clothes. There's a proliferation of secondhand sort of marketplaces like Vinted. There are others, or there are many others, and it is starting to become a really accepted and fundamental part of the fashion industry. And I think that's only going to increase. This interest in sustainability and the environment is also being seen in how they consider things like the environmental impact of deliveries of e-commerce. It's not putting them off doing e-commerce per se, but it is a consideration. I think it comes down to then brand choice, particularly with so many fast fashion brands and a lot of similar items. Many younger people in particular are choosing to buy from those that can offer a sort of much more sustainable delivery, as well as sort of sustainable and ethical production. I think these things are starting to become much more entrenched in the fashion buyer market. Now, it's not everybody, it's not ubiquitous. It's a sort of growing group, and I think it is confined to a particular group. It's not mass market per se yet, but it is something that's increased over the years. Each time we've done this report, it's become more important to shoppers, particularly, as I say, the younger ones who drive the fashion market. So I think, again, this move to second-hand, as well as ethical production and sustainable delivery, and all those things are becoming increasingly important to shoppers. How you do that as a fashion brand, very difficult, because it costs a lot of money, and people aren't prepared to pay the extra per se to achieve this. As customers, they want it, they don't want to pay for it, and particularly with the economic conditions, that's a challenge for retailers. But maybe a lot of the larger fashion brands who can do this at scale, maybe this is something they can do and use to help grow and develop their businesses. On a final note, really, about that, a lot of companies are claiming to be ethical and sustainable, but it started to sort of wear a bit thin with consumers. Most sort of don't trust the sustainable and green claims made by fashion brands, and this greenwashing idea is sort of the antithesis of what I was just talking about. That brands are sort of saying it but not doing it, and particularly because there's a cost attached. But be warned, they're onto you. And I think sort of trying to get the sort of authenticity of your actual green claims across is going to become ever more vital to selling fashion in EMEA. So that's a canter through some of the key findings. Say, do scan the QR code and download the report. It goes into much more detail about all the things I've just discussed and more. A lot of case studies that outline how a lot of these leading brands are doing many of these things, particularly around secondhand and sustainability. I'm now going to bring Drew back in because I think there's quite a few issues there we can unpack together, particularly around these ideas of authenticity and sort of engagement, which is increasingly vital to all these fashion brands who are trying to grow, particularly in these tough economic times. Really, I want to sort of like ask you, I think, sort of the tough economic climate that retailers are in, particularly in Europe, particularly in fashion, because it's such a competitive market. To thrive under such conditions, what sort of things do you recommend? I mean, how can sort of technology and companies like yourself sort of help them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Paul. Especially, obviously we're facing these headwinds right now, but none of us has a crystal ball and knowing, are we at the beginning? Are we in the middle? Is this or are we nearing the end? Um, and I think that really underscores. I think there's some what I have seen really be important to success for companies, having weathered a number of ups and downs like this in my 20-year career, is one, making sure we're making the right investments in our platforms that really bring good observability in overall and operationally and in customer engagement, so that we're really able to optimize in those areas. I'm continually surprised at the number of companies that are flying blind, that don't have really good analytic insight to understand their catalog and product performance, to understand how are our products engaging with the customers, and that really starting to unlock a flywheel of being able to continuously improve, so that you have an adage that I learned years ago, that if you're not measuring it, it's not important to you. And I think that has been really insightful and impactful to me in how I think about overall engagement and strategy. Is, where do I have good visibility? Not just trusting on intuition, but am I really gaining insights and having data? And some examples of that are, do you have platforms that allow you to have insight and see how your products are engaging with your different demographics, both in country or across country? Do you have good insights on how different categories are performing? And then having platforms that really allow you to be tuning and adjusting your approaches there to your customer. So that's not just in your catalog assortment, but how you think about your search, in recommendations, in presenting the state of the customer. Are you really able? The key piece in this is being able to personalize your journeys. Customers are really coming to expect that they'll experience personalized journeys with their retailers, and we need to get out of this, making a customer feel like they're continually on a first date with us. There's such an opportunity now, with all the data that we're collecting, to really use that to enhance the customer experience, to treat them not like this is their first time, but that we're really learning what they like, what's working, what styles they're into, and really can begin to optimize our assortment engagement with them in a much more personalized way. I think another key thing that I have seen is around community building, and really an example of this is being able to create a forum that allows customers to better engage with you and with each other around the products that they're purchasing from you, to give meaningful reviews and feedback. Like in fashion, allowing the customers to upload images in their reviews of how these products fit and look on them, and that tell about size and fit, and so that future customers are really able to see that and leverage that to know, hey, is this a product I'm going to like? Because at the end of the day, it's about building trust. Are we finding avenues to really help build trust and engagement with our customers, so that we can minimize returns, we can increase delight, and all these things really, in the end, help contribute to increasing long-term customer value.
That's really interesting. It's particularly pertinent, I think, to online retailers. But as our data showed, a lot of the ways that European consumers are shopping for fashion is in a much more hybrid, multi, and even omni-channel way, with physical retail playing such a sort of large role in the process. Though I think obviously online is playing a big part in how they research and come to make that purchase. How does what you've just sort of talked about there apply in this sort of hybrid, multi-channel, omni-channel world?
Well, I think, quite honestly, Paul, that hybrid model really is the best of both worlds. And, I think the largest, most successful brands are really taking a holistic approach to that and being able to leverage the advantages of both and bringing those together in a more synergistic way. In fact, customers or brands that are able to bridge that and get their customers more in a multi-channel approach experience an overall 30% increase in lifetime value of a customer. So if you think about it naturally, right, there is this tactical nature that you want to feel and touch and understand the fit of a product, and that really nothing kind of replaces that in-store experience. But as you get to know a brand and the fit and feel of their clothes, there's times that you're much more comfortable being able to buy products from them online, because you've gotten that fit and feel, and you don't need to make an extra trip in order to satisfy that need, or maybe reorder something that you really love. And I think there's ways to really bring those together. I mean, one, for the traditional brick and mortar and online, is if you can bring that together as your shoppers for in-store experiences that are much more engaging. Like Nike and Adidas are both doing this in a really great way, where like Adidas uses our visual search in store, where you can take a picture of a product in store and right there in the app experience request that product in size be brought to you by a sales associate for you to try on. So that's really driving a much more engaging in-store experience, where like Nike online, you can find products that are available in store, and you would request that they be set aside for you in a trying room that's ready for you to go in and try on the products that you're really interested in. I think another really important bridge there is, as you're in the store, maybe they don't have the size that you want, but you really want the product. A lot of retailers are using in-store experiences, handheld devices with sales associate, to quickly be able to help the customer look and see, hey, do we have more sizes available online? Or if not, are there other visually similar products that we offer? And really allowing to close that loop and allow the customer right there to purchase that product and have it delivered to their home in short order. So I think there's being able to bring those together where you really have this seamless, endless aisle experience in store. I think is a great experience for customers. But also online, having visibility to your in-store inventory to know, hey, is it worth a trip for me in? Is this product going to be there? Am I going to be able to try it on before I have to make that purchase decision? So I think they can really work together in a great synergistic way. And there's some neat companies like Stock in Store out of Australia and others that are really helping make this possible for smaller retailers to be able to add, to their experience.
That's really insightful. One of the things that did come out of the research, as we saw there towards the end of my slides, is this idea that sustainability and ethical production and that sort of thing is much more important now to a growing number of consumers in Europe. Um, One of the key things that really surprised me was that there was the sort of jadedness of people's attitude towards greenwashing. How can retailers overcome that? What can you and companies like yours do to help them sort of authenticate their their sustainability and ethical message? And how else can technology play a role in sustainability generally in the fashion industry?
So I've seen, in the course of my career, uh, a growing demand and interest of being able to bring sustainability to the forefront of how we're thinking about retailing. Um, and clearly the data is showing that this is really important, to the point that secondhand in Europe has become uh, such, third highest visited site. But it's not even, it's not just Vinted. You've got Threaded Up, whose stock value has increased over almost 120% this year. H&M have now taking a 70% stake in Sellpy, in secondhand fashion. In fact, I think they've just committed to expanding to 20 additional countries. So there's obviously, that's a growing movement that's, I think, really encouraging, because traditionally fashion, has had trouble in the green space of being sustainable, and clearly the customers are backing this. So, you know, but key here, in this whole greenwashing concern, is authenticity. Like, how, as retailers, do we really not just do this as, in a greenwash way, as a band-aid or badge that we put on, claiming that, but that we are really doing meaningful things. I think secondhand is one. I think there's not, but we have to be creative in how we think about this. I think there's an opportunity for brands to think about trade in or trade up programs, where they're providing some incentive to bring you know to trade in some of their previously bought and well loved products, as a credit potentially for new. But also just how we think about our how we source. Are we sourcing sustainably? Are we ethically producing these products? But that also requires transparency in our supply chain. How do we bring visibility to that, so that it isn't perceived as just greenwashing, that we're really taking that seriously, so the customer can, as your data reported, many customers are looking into this. And so I think being able to highlight that in a meaningful way, whether it be, uh, greener ways in which we do delivery, or greener ways in which we source and supply, but being able to highlight that through our experiences, whether it be in store and app, are going to be important and help bridge that story and meaningfully connect it to the customer.
So tell us a little bit about visual search and AI. They're very topical currently, particularly the AI side of things, but visual searches too. I mean, it's been around a while, but it's never really taken off. How do you see that developing, and how do you see that developing, particularly in European fashion sales?
Well, we're seeing our largest adoption right now is in India, where over 10%, 17%, sorry, of customers are using visual search in order to find products and to do a visual comparison. The adoption isn't quite as fast in Europe or the US, but we are seeing growth in that space. The It's a great unlock in terms of it in really being able to exactly, much more exactly, find the product that you're looking for. If you have a product that you an image of the product you're already after. But I think more interestingly, what visual AI opens is not just to be able to click a picture and search for something, but if you have a picture of something that you like, to be able to follow that thread and find other products that are like it, but maybe different in some key attribute that you care about. Like, you find a red dress that you really like, but you want one that's a little bit shorter, or maybe is sleeveless. What visual AI opens is now not only for you to have a much more immersive conversation with the platform on trying to find exactly what you're looking for, where it's hard to describe by words. How do you explain that in a way that's understandable, to a machine? How explicit you need to get. But if you've got a good starting point of something that you like, now you can follow that thread and just explain what it is that you'd like different about it.
Building on that, and to wrap things up a bit, what sort of trends do you sort of see retailers facing in the sort of 12, 24 months ahead? What are some of the technology trends? What are some of the sort of shopping trends? And how can businesses like yours sort of help them meet those challenges?
Well, generative AI is proving to be very disruptive across a myriad of spaces, but I think fashion is one of them. With Google just recently announcing or starting to soft release their virtual try on, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And I think that's great. I mean, if you imagine as a customer now being able to see the fashion that you're interested in, not only on a body like yours, but maybe even on your own body as you go forward. So, it makes the catalog potentially much more engaging and realistic.
Well, Drew, that was great. Very insightful. Some really great things there for people to take away. So thank you for taking the time to do that and for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for watching. The QR code will magically appear on your screen while I'm talking. Scan that, download the report. It goes into way more detail than we've had time to do here. It touches on many of the things that both I and Drew have talked about and many more. So do give that a read. Do give us your feedback and thoughts on it. We'd love to hear from you. And once again, Drew, thank you for joining us. And thank you, dear viewer, for watching. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.